I parked my 12-year-old Toyota between a matte black Maserati and a gleaming white BMW A7. Their engines purred, mine sighed. It had been exactly 9 years since I last set foot inside the Harrow estate, and I remembered, down to the hour, what silence felt like when it wasn't chosen. Back then, I left without a scene. No screaming match, no dramatic exit, just the sound of a front door closing behind someone who wasn't supposed to matter. I was 25 then. I had nothing but a refurbished laptop, an apartment with peeling paint, and a dream no one in my family even tried to understand. Now I was 34. My dress was simple, navy blue, no designer label. My shoes were silent on the marble floor. I wore no jewelry except for one thing, a leather-banded wristwatch, a gift from someone who once said, "You'll need something to measure the moments they'll never see coming." I walked into the dining room alone. 16 chairs, crystal glasses, a table that still smelled like veal and varnish. And there she was, my mother, Evelyn Harrow, elegant, polished, and cold as the silver laid beside her plate. She turned to me with a smile that was all sharp edge and social protocol. "Well," she said, her voice just loud enough for the staff to hear, "the disappointment returns." No one gasped. There were only smirks. From my brother Dane, the high-end corporate attorney, from his wife Amelia, who once told me tech jobs were just fancy typing, and from cousin Landon, whose portfolio made him think he knew the world. I didn't flinch. I didn't reply. My name is Celeste Harrow, and tonight, I didn't come to fit in. I came to finish something. There's a photograph somewhere in the Harrow estate. I'm sure it's still there, tucked away in a gold-trimmed album on the third shelf of Evelyn's sitting room, the shelf reserved for memories worth showcasing. It was taken the day Dane graduated from Columbia Law. Everyone's in it. Father in a tailored navy suit, Evelyn in pale yellow silk, Dane front and center, with his diploma angled just right for the camera. And me, off to the far right, barely in frame, like I'd wandered into someone else's portrait. That was the day I told them I'd accepted a job offer in Chicago, a junior cybersecurity analyst position at a defense subcontractor. Not glamorous, but solid. A job that actually required thinking, not connections. I remember the moment I said it. We were seated on the veranda, crystal flutes in hand. Evelyn blinked once and said, "That's niche." My father didn't look up from his phone. Dane laughed and offered to help rewrite my resume, just in case I came to my senses. "We can still get you into Georgetown Law. Summer intake's not full yet." I remember folding my napkin carefully, deliberately, like the only thing I could control was the shape of my exit. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for validation. I didn't raise my voice. The next morning, I left. No speech, no slammed doors, no scene. Just 2 suitcases, a train ticket, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than any farewell. That was the beginning of Harrow Systems. But back then, it wasn't a company. It wasn't even an idea with a name. It was a compulsion, a need, a kind of quiet, clawing urgency to prove that I existed outside their curated vision of success. I moved into a walk-up apartment in Chicago's West Side, where the pipes rattled like old bones and the heating worked only when it felt generous. I coded on a used MacBook I bought off Craigslist. I lived on boxed pasta and gas station coffee. Every pitch I gave went ignored. Every cold email vanished into the ether. Every rejection, if I got one, was vague and politely final. Until one wasn't. Her name was Marla Torres, former NSA, retired early after flagging a major security breach no one wanted to admit existed. She had a reputation for seeing threats where no one else did, and for being right. She didn't care where I went to school. She didn't ask about my family. She asked about the code. She listened, and then she wrote me a check. $250,000. Her entire quarterly dividend payout. "You've got 6 months to prove me right," she said. Then she handed me a leather-banded wristwatch. Not flashy, not expensive, just intentional. "This isn't to track hours," she said. "It's to track moments, the ones they'll pretend never happened." I've worn that watch every day since. We built our first prototype in a sublet with no Wi-Fi and furniture made of cinder blocks. The first time the system caught a threat vector faster than the government's own tracking, I didn't celebrate. I barely slept. We were still invisible. But one night, 3.5 years in, we weren't. We caught something no one else did. A major breach in Homeland's secondary infrastructure grid. The data was buried deep in a file labeled non-critical. We flagged it, sent the alert, and the system didn't just light up, it detonated. Within 2 weeks, I was sitting in a secured conference room with 3-star generals and State Department advisors. No family name, no introductions. Just credentials, performance metrics, and code that spoke for itself. That was when Harrow Systems officially existed. And yet, when the first big contract closed, 9 figures, 3 departments, I didn't throw a party. I didn't send out press kits. I mailed Evelyn a letter. It was short. 1 line, "We've landed." 3 weeks later, I received her reply. Typed, centered, signed in fountain pen. Do not associate the Harrow name with anything that might not last. No congratulations, no call, no curiosity. I framed the letter, not out of bitterness, out of necessity. Because every time I hit a wall, I looked at it. Every time a deal fell apart, I reread it. Not to prove her wrong, but to remind myself how far I'd already come without needing anyone at that table. The years went by. I didn't return for holidays, for birthdays, for deaths. Not even when my father had his minor stroke and Dane gave a speech about family unity. I was never invited. I never asked. Until now. Until tonight. Back in their dining room, surrounded by cutlery that cost more than my first year's rent, I looked at the faces that once smirked at my ambition like it was a punchline. And I remembered. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to close the loop. Dinner at the Harrow estate had always felt less like a meal and more like a broadcast. Everything was curated, down to the floral arrangements, wine pairings, and chandelier brightness. The staff wore black, the silverware gleamed, and the conversation, like always, was nothing more than a highlight reel, stitched together by egos in formal wear. Dane was the first to take the stage, mid-story, of course. His voice confident, practiced, the same voice he used to bulldoze opponents in arbitration hearings. Tonight, he was recounting some courtroom victory over a hedge fund giant. The way he wielded his fork, you'd think it was a gavel. Seated beside him was Amelia, his wife, dressed in pastel silk and pride. She inserted commentary with perfect timing. Dane's the youngest equity partner in the firm's history, as though she were a live-in PR agent. Across the table, Landon swirled his Bordeaux with the wrist of a man who thought he invented it, going on about emerging markets and investment positioning like he was auditioning for a TED Talk no one asked for. I sat in silence. The veal was plated on the same bone-white china Evelyn had imported from Milan when I was 17. The same year she forgot my birthday. I picked at it politely, mechanically, reminding myself I'd eaten worse in the early years. Moldy drywall and lukewarm ramen had once been my idea of luxury. "Celeste," Evelyn said suddenly, voice dipped in faux interest. "Still working in technology, dear?" Not cybersecurity, not digital defense, not the company I built from nothing, just working. I nodded, keeping my voice neutral. Still building systems. That was all it took to invite attention, the performative kind. Landon leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table, like proximity gave him context. "What kind of systems? Apps? Crypto?" Before I could answer, Dane interrupted. "She was always glued to a screen. I remember, when we were kids, she'd sit up all night in front of that busted Dell. Couldn't tear her away from it." Evelyn chuckled, nostalgic. "We thought it was a phase," Amelia added while slicing her veal. "So, do you have a team now, or is it still a solo gig?" That's when I could have told them. I could have explained that Harrow Systems, yes, I kept the name, was now operating across 3 continents, that we employed over 400 engineers and analysts, that we were finalizing a NATO cybersecurity framework, that our new Tokyo office was preparing to handle classified communication lines for joint military operations. But I didn't. I just said, "No, I have help." Dane smirked, tipping his glass. "Eventually, everyone needs a real career, The laughter that followed was light, controlled, dangerous, like surgical steel. Evelyn stepped in with her own spin. Celeste has always carved her own path. The word hung in the air like a polite insult. Carved, as if I were hacking through a jungle with a spoon while they watched from penthouses. My path wasn't carved. It was built, with concrete, rebar, and sleepless nights. Dane raised his glass again, this time mockingly. To the rebels in the family, may they find their way back before it's too late. I didn't raise mine. Instead, I looked down at my wristwatch. Still ticking, still mine. Landon leaned in again, a little too eager. My firm's getting serious about tech. You should pitch something. We're happy to give your little project a shot. Little project. I met his eyes, calm, even. It's not little, he chuckled. Then why haven't we heard of it? I let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle. Maybe, I said quietly, you weren't listening. The reaction was immediate. Amelia let out a laugh, sharp, surprised. She's got a bite. Evelyn topped off someone's wine, like the conversation was a game she was still winning. We're just teasing, darling. It's all in good fun. But it wasn't. Not to me. It never had been. Because I remembered every offhand comment, every withheld invitation, every time they redefined success in a way that excluded me by design. Their fun was always my dissection. I just stopped bleeding. Dessert arrived, fig tartlets with lavender honey and cream fraiche. I didn't touch mine. Dane launched into another story about a deposition in L.A. The words droned like background static. My focus drifted. I watched the chandelier reflections ripple across crystal. I watched my mother's expression, serene, in control. I watched Landon and Amelia and Dane, all of them, so sure of the version of me they'd invented. And then, on cue, it happened. A soft knock echoed from the hallway. A moment later, Jillian appeared. She wore black. She only wore black when I asked her to. Hair sleek, eyes sharp. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She walked straight to my chair, leaned slightly, and in a tone low but impossible to ignore, said, "Apologies for the interruption, Miss Harrow. The jet is prepped and waiting. Captain Ung requests final confirmation for Tokyo. They'll need to lock in the flight path within the hour." A fork slipped from Amelia's hand. It struck the china with a dull chime. No one moved to pick it up. I reached for my cloth napkin. "Thank you," I said, calm and crisp. "Tell him we'll proceed as scheduled. Stopover in San Francisco is still confirmed. I'll join the board vote en route." Jillian nodded once and disappeared. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was seismic. Dane's mouth parted, but nothing came out. Landon blinked like he'd missed a scene. Evelyn sat straighter, posture perfect. Her hand gripped her wineglass tighter than necessary. Finally, Dane recovered. "Jet?" I didn't answer. I unlocked my phone and slid it across the table. Bloomberg, front page. Harrow Systems secures $1.2 billion Homeland Security infrastructure contract. My photo, taken in D.C. last month, looked back at them like a mirror they didn't want to face. Landon leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "That's you." I nodded. "That's my company." Evelyn whispered, "You have a jet?" "I have a company," I said. "The jet is just efficient." Dane gave a strangled laugh, trying to reassert footing. "You're saying this is real? That this isn't hype?" I tilted my head. "You think Bloomberg inflates federal contracts?" He looked away. No one touched dessert. No one raised a glass. For once, no one had anything clever to say. And that silence? That silence finally belonged to me. It was Evelyn who finally broke the silence. Her voice, usually precise and rehearsed like a keynote speaker, was softer now, lower like she thought volume could undo distance. "You built this alone?" I looked up. "Not alone," I said. "Just not with any of you." The words didn't echo. They settled. Dane tried to gather the pieces. "If you'd told us, if we'd known, we could have helped. We're family, Celeste." I raised an eyebrow, not out of mockery, just disbelief. When I was 25, you sat in Dad's study and told him I was a liability. You said putting my name in the family newsletter might dilute the Harrow brand. He shifted in his chair. That was a long time ago. And this is right now. Evelyn's gaze dropped. For the first time, she didn't seem to know where to look. Her hand hovered over the phone I'd set on the table, as if touching it would confirm everything she had worked so hard to dismiss. Families say things they don't mean, she said. Almost gentle, almost believable. I reached into my bag and pulled out a creased but carefully preserved sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished oak. Her eyes scanned the heading, her letterhead, her words. Do not use the Harrow name for anything that might not last. She didn't touch it. That was her style. Never deny. Just pretend memory is negotiable. Landon leaned in, shifting gears. If your company's scaling, there might be room for collaboration. We know people. There's capital, connections. You never know. Harrow Systems might benefit from some legacy ties. I waited for him to finish. I let the silence sharpen around his words. Then I said, We're not raising. Not now. Not ever with you. His mouth twitched. The rejection didn't surprise him, but the finality did. Amelia tried a different tactic. She smiled, that soft, practiced smile women like her wear like jewelry. If we'd known what you were building, maybe things would have been different. I tilted my head. Different for who? You? Me? Or the version of me you could stand to be proud of? Her eyes flickered. She didn't respond. You weren't waiting to support me, I continued. You were waiting to recognize me, once it was convenient, once I was no longer a threat to the narrative. She looked down, adjusting the napkin in her lap, as if something there could be fixed. Then Evelyn moved. She stood, slowly, deliberately, as if elegance could still carry authority. She walked around the table, her steps careful, like grace could mend years of fracture. She stopped beside me and reached out, fingertips brushing my wrist. You're still a Harrow, she said. That means something. I looked her in the eye. To you? She blinked. I didn't. To the world I built, I added. It means nothing. Her hand dropped. You're angry, she said, her voice finally cracking at the edges. I understand, but don't let pride close doors that family can help open. I stood, gently pushing back my chair. You had 9 years to open a door, I said. You chose to paint it shut. My phone buzzed once. Jillian. On schedule, as always. I folded my napkin and placed it beside the untouched tartlet, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the plate. My movements were slow, intentional, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted them to sit in the discomfort of silence. I have a board vote in 6 hours, I said. We're finalizing a NATO contract. Evelyn's lips parted. Her words hesitated. Then, finally, why tonight, Celeste? Why come at all? I didn't answer immediately. I reached for my coat draped over the chair, sliding my arms through the sleeves like armor. I walked to the threshold of the room and paused, my hand resting on the doorframe. Then, without turning, to see if anything had changed. I turned back just enough to meet their eyes. It hasn't. Then I walked out of that room, out of that house, and out of whatever role they had written for me in their curated family script. Behind me, no one followed. They never did. The next morning, the damage control began. A LinkedIn request from Amelia, a voicemail from Dane. We should reconnect. Family synergy has value. An overwritten email from Landon loaded with buzzwords. Innovation, alignment, strategic growth. And from Evelyn, a handwritten note delivered by courier. Heavy cream cardstock, the Harrow crest embossed in gold. We should rebuild. You've made us proud. I didn't reply, not to any of them. Instead, I forwarded every message to Jillian with a 2-word instruction, block list. That evening, a delivery arrived at the Harrow estate. A single box, no return address, no card. Inside it was the letter Evelyn had once sent me, the one that warned me not to use the family name. Folded neatly beside it was a photo, not posed, not filtered, just a simple shot taken from outside the dining room window the night before. The entire family was in the frame. Mid-conversation, mid-sip, crystal and silver and posture. There was only one space that stood out. My seat, empty. There was a note attached to the back of the photo. It read, "I was there. You just didn't see me." Some of us were never really invited to the table, but we remember who looked away. I never sent another letter, never answered another message. Because the truth is, I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to say they were wrong, or that I mattered now. I had already mattered when no one was watching. I had already won when no one was cheering. And I had already healed in the silence they mistook for defeat. I never needed a seat at their table. I built my own. And this one has no room for ghosts.